the council, Jonathan, the question in terms of why did you launch the campaign to improve broadband and digital connectivity, and what barriers did you encounter, please, and what actions have you been taken to improve connectivity in Westminster, please, and what level broadly of investment did it take?
Okay, thank you. We launched the campaign because so many of our residents and businesses find that they have insufficient connectivity to live 21st century life. I think everybody accepts now that super fast and indeed ultra fast connectivity is an essential utility, both for businesses to run their businesses and also for people to be able to enjoy what life offers. And there are many residents in Westminster who can't watch Netflix or iPlayer because they don't have sufficient connectivity, and there are many small businesses who find themselves in a situation where they can't run their business and they can't compete properly because the offering which they have available to them at an affordable price is insufficient to meet their current needs, never mind their future and prospective needs. And just to pick up on the point which I made earlier on, there is very much in Westminster a two-tier market between large businesses who have lease lines and are able to make their own arrangements and the rest. And PT, as the historic infrastructure provider, have taken the view that a residential connectivity, which might be in single-figure megabits per second on the download and 0.3 on the upload, is sufficient for people other than those with a very large requirement. And we differ with them on that view, and we try very hard to get them to accept that small businesses actually need much better connectivity than that, and they need it at a price that they can afford. So looking at Westminster, everybody assumes, because it's the centre of our great city, that it will have fantastic connectivity. But in the recent Broadband report, we actually came in at the 635th out of 650 constituencies nationally. So the level of connectivity is clearly, on any reasonable comparison, unacceptably low. When you consider that within Westminster we have such a large percentage of creative industries and many, many thousands of small businesses, largest number of startup businesses, and we have various types of businesses that have a reasonable expectation that they can run their businesses with sufficient connectivity, and they're just not being catered for. So we've tried very, very hard to do two things. One is to put pressure on the incumbent provider, Openreach, to upgrade those facilities to a reasonable standard, and then alongside that to encourage other people to come in and fill the gap that Openreach have allowed to be created by not upgrading to fibre at all. There are still 4 exchanges in Westminster that are not fibre enabled, and Openreach is still advocating that we go to a system which relies on copper for the last element of connectivity as being enough for the future. Now, luckily, the market has seen the gap and is coming in now to fill that vacuum which has been left behind. And we are actually at risk now of moving from famine to feast, as we have huge numbers of interested parties now saying that they would like to provide what we want, which is fibre to the premises on a cost-effective basis. And that's across the city, across all types of business and residential areas, to provide that connectivity which is needed. And we, I think, anticipate that within months, if not certainly within a year or so, many of those gaps will have been filled. Whilst and we are encouraging people to do that. I think we're basically we're digital tarts. We will go with anybody that will provide those services on a cost-effective basis for those who need it in Westminster. And to give you some idea of how this two-tier market operates, you've got Sony or Warner Brothers who've got their huge connectivity for their operations across the world. But then you've got small creative industries in and around Soho who still find it quicker to download something onto a DVD and walk it round to somebody else in Soho than send it across some measure of just how bad it is. So that's why we launched it. We had great demand from businesses and residents who often come to live in Westminster from other great cities across the world, who find it absolutely incredible that they can't do what they can do in Seoul or Singapore or Sydney or New York and just have their connection put in as they move in at a level which will allow them to do everything they need to do, and which will have sufficient capacity for the growth that we know is coming down the line with the Internet of Things and with the fact that we've seen exponential growth in data usage. And I think have a reasonable expectation that growth is going to continue. We touched on some of the problems. Way leaves, we've done our bit in relation to way leave, both in terms of participating in the process of agreeing a standard form way leave and going further than that by agreeing those way leaves and using them on our own buildings that we have within the Westminster portfolio. We're working with the utility companies in terms of civil installation to look at how we can, where fibre needs to be put into the street, how we can reduce the delays in relation to that in order to speed things up. And even though we were told by Openreach that there was no demand from SMEs, we had the highest take-up of the voucher scheme that was previously offered, and we've introduced our own voucher scheme at £1,000 per business as opposed to 3,000 because some of the costs have come down, and that was what is available. So we anticipate a further boost to SMEs in particular to be able to create connectivity and to stimulate that competition and availability of fibre to the premises. So, we have had some issues around state aid. I think others may speak to that later on because we've been very keen to ensure that we don't get left behind. Those issues have been resolved, and that's why I say we offer a facilitative role to anybody and everybody that wants to come along and provide these services. That hasn't necessarily mean that we've had to invest a huge amount of money. As I said, the role Tony is one to facilitate rather than to undertake the investment ourselves, but we do encourage others to invest. We've recently seen the great estates, and in particular the Grosvenor estate, take the lead in relation to installing their own ducting system, and we would encourage others to do that they again pick up from where the incumbent has failed to provide the ducting, put ducts in and make them available on a commercial basis to anybody that then wishes to provide service through them. So that's kind of a flavour of what we're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.